Well, it could have been better, but it could have been worse. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show. Appreciate all of you who have done so already. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So, it was not what I was expecting based on the information that I had been hearing from people more connected than I, but it was never a surefire thing that we were going to get Nyckoles Harbor. And I was disappointed, yes. 100%, which is an okay thing to feel as a fan. I think the most annoying take from any fan this time of year is, we didn't really need that guy. No, I laid it out earlier this week on the show. I would have rather had Harbor than Pleasant. I'm not upset about getting Pleasant, by the way. I'm quite happy that we got Roderick Pleasant. I can think that and also be disappointed that we did not land Nyckoles Harbor. Is it an indictment of the coaching staff? Nope, don't think so. He's from the other side of the country. He's much closer to home. That is a 100% compelling factor. Like, this is not a territorial miss. This is not a, oh my gosh, they had him and they blew it. What happened? No, it's not. It's nothing like that. Roster-wise in 2023, I think Harbor had an opportunity to make more of an impact. Pleasant, I think it's a little bit more of an uphill battle, though he brings something to the table I'll talk about in a moment that I do think could allow him to see the field a little bit sooner than a lot of other true freshman defensive backs. But not landing Nyckoles Harbor was, I won't say a surprise, but then landing Pleasant was a surprise. There was just a lot of give and take, back and forth, up and down, roller coaster feeling around that time. There was another good piece of news as well that could make missing Nyckoles Harbor, it could soften the blow of that, and that's Deuce Robinson, who did not commit yesterday and is still out there. Oregon hasn't gotten him on campus for a visit yet. I think we should try to because of where the tight end room currently sits. So that was kind of good pieces. And if Deuce Robinson had committed yesterday, who I believe is the number one tight end in the 2023 class, he was not going to choose Oregon. The only chance the Ducks would have had, which they now will have, is if he had pushed back his commitment. So now Oregon can try and get him on campus. That's good news. So you got good news on two of the recruits and not as good news on the most important recruit I think Oregon was going after yesterday. There is something important to remember in this class, but disappointed on Harbor, not overly surprised, not an indictment, but definitely a bit of a bummer, but maybe a silver lining if it means we can land Deuce Robinson down the line. But it did open the door for Oregon to get Roderick Pleasant. And I think this says a couple of things about the Ducks. Number one, speed matters to Dan Lanning. And he said that in his press conference. And getting a guy like this, or like Kamari Terrell in the last class, who did play a little bit in 2022, they want to have more speed in the secondary. And this is a sort of guy who is also a track stud that Oregon needs to have in the secondary, because at times this year kind of felt like they were lacking speed. Team speed overall, I think can upgrade. I think that's one of the biggest reasons you're seeing so much turnover, even with, veteran returners like Steve Stevens and Jamal Hill, Triquez Bridges, even in the secondary. You're seeing new players brought in because I think Mario Cristobal's players were a little bit more physical, hard-nosed, hard-hitting sort of guys. Like if you think of it in NCAA 14 football terms, which is a great way to think about anything, obviously, Mario wanted hard hitter specialist DBs. I think Lanning wants more speed/cover guys. And I think that's the right way to go because you're going up against, first of all, you're playing in a sport now that is much more pass heavy than it used to be. And second of all, you're going up against a loaded lineup of quarterbacks seemingly year after year in the Pac-12. Now Jaden Rashad is going down to Arizona State. Dante Moore, UCLA. Shedeur Sanders, Colorado. That's kind of the next wave. And the current wave is really good too. And you never know what transfers are going to come in. DJU at Oregon State. See what Washington's able to do post Michael Penix. But Pleasant's a guy who has been rising in the ranks. I think his composite rating on 24/7 has gone up in the last couple of months. But his speed is elite. High end. That's the sort of guy that is a true freshman when you're trying to see the field. I could see him playing on special teams. Because when you have that sort of speed, you could be a gunner on the outside. You could be on kickoff coverage. There are roles there for guys who have that sort of speed. He's a little bit smaller at 5'11". However, Oregon last year had a number of sets defensively where they had 3 defensive backs on the field. Where they had 3 corners on the field, rather. They always had 5 DBs in a 4-2-5 pretty much, but there were a lot of instances where they would put Dante Manning at nickel corner, or sometimes if Gonzo was shadowing someone, they'd put him at nickel corner. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Pleasant could compete for that spot. At 5'11", he's certainly got that sort of body type. You got Cole Martin in the class as well, who's another 4-star corner. Now, Pleasant is more highly regarded, but when you have that level of speed, we saw Kamari Terrell a couple times this year, mostly in garbage time, but there were a couple meaningful snaps for him. I think you could see that for Pleasant this year. And if at the very least in the short term, though I do stand by my take that Harbor had a better chance to play sooner, in the long run, yeah, maybe that's a guy who starts playing quite a bit. But at the very least, he could play portions of the season. It may be a smaller role than what Harbor would have been able to carve out, which is why I was hoping to get him, because it's easy to look at 2023. But going down the line, there's a lot of upside here for a guy who has that level of speed. I don't know what he does in the kick return game, but Oregon's got a void there too. I mean, positions that are kind of up in the air. One safety slot, maybe. Maybe one safety slot. Kick returner, just about any special team slot. All up in the air. Roderick Pleasant's commitment says something else about Oregon. That is indeed good news for the Ducks. And the good news for all of you is that you can go check out FanDuel, because FanDuel, which is that one if you're watching on YouTube, is someone who we're really excited about here at Locked On, because they are our official betting partner. That's right. It's FanDuel, and they're the number one sports book in America. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have a bunch of great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Its interface is really simple for someone like me, whether it's online or on the app. It is very, very easy to use. So go join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and the Eagles. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Remember that time that USC and UCLA announced they were going to join the Big Ten? I remember that time. I was there. It was a crazy day. Hosting Locked On Pac-12 that day, boy, that was a whirlwind. trying to keep up with the news, figure out what was happening, posing questions. Yeah. Anyway, I recall that time. I also recall a time where some people, and it's actually a question that I've had in the mailbag for quite a while, were suggesting that Oregon needed to get out of the pack and go to the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten is where all the great players go. It's where they want to be. By the way, in this recruiting cycle from the prep ranks, more 5-stars are going to the pack than the Big Ten. Just saying. And it's on, I believe, equal footing once you take USC and UCLA out and put them over there. But Oregon's got a 5-star and Colorado's got 2 of them. Just saying. Anyway, but on the recruiting front, I think it's a fair question to ask, now that I take away my facetious persona, that, you know, whether or not Oregon needed to go to the Big Ten, or do they need to go to the Big Ten to keep pace with everybody else? Well, here we have another instance with Lincoln Riley at USC and the Big Ten move very much announced, and this is a Southern California kid, and he's choosing the Ducks. I think Roderick Pleasant, who was hot on a number of teams' radars for a while, but it really came down seemingly to USC and Oregon. I think Cal was sort of in the mix as well. Oregon's recruiting power is not something that I'm at all worried about. If we remain in the pack, which I hope we do, I understand the appeal to the Big Ten, but anyway, conversation for another day. I hope and think we will remain in the pack, and worrying about our competitiveness from a recruiting standpoint, I think this is just another indicator that that's not a problem. You can argue it's more of a problem for other programs in the conference, but for Oregon, I mean, look at the players that we were after this cycle that we didn't land. Caden Proctor, Nyckoles Harbor, Peyton Bowen. I mean, going after all these sorts of guys. And Oregon is getting down into those sorts of players, top 2 or 3, and they're coming from all over the country. This is just the latest example of the fact that Oregon's going to be able to recruit if you have a staff that cares about recruiting. And guess what? This staff clearly does. In a big, big way. And in a great way. And when you're talking about defensive players too, I think Oregon's definitely going to have the edge when you have Dan Lanning at the helm compared to a Lincoln Riley at USC or a number of other programs who are going to go after him or after these sorts of players. I don't think that that's a concern at all. And I think Pleasant committing and, you know, when it really looked like it was going to be USC and then all of a sudden it was Oregon, you were like, wait, we get to play that meme that I absolutely love of the soccer fans in the bar, and then the screen is a green screen, and then it flashes a picture of Dan Lanning tweeting the Duck, and they're going nuts. I laugh at that every time. It's hilarious. It's absolutely fan freaking tastic. But I think the Ducks are in a good spot. I think Lanning knows what he's doing. And on that particular note, did you know that this is the second highest rated recruiting class in Oregon history? Early indicators can often be a sign of what will come later. And last year, when Oregon underwent a coaching change and a bunch of recruits pulled out, understandably, and Lanning came in and salvaged it and got it into the top 25 after it had fallen to the 50s, I looked at it and went, wait. He did what now? He got it. It was down, and it's now, oh, this guy's going to be able to recruit with this particular staff at this school and with this program. And guess what? When you factor in the portal, which is what I'll always do when referring to rankings, because that's a big part of the roster acquisition now, as we all know, Lanning and company, top 10 in the country. Top 10 in the country. Isn't that kind of what we were hoping for? Isn't that kind of what we wanted? Yes, it was. And it had the potential to be even greater. If Kenny Dillingham stays, then Dante Moore's a part of this class too. And it could be pushing top 5. If the Peyton Bowen saga does, there were a number of near misses. Dante Moore, Peyton Bowen, Nyckoles Harbor. And yet the Ducks look up and we're sitting top 10. And doesn't it kind of feel, strangely enough, like there's a solid cadre of Oregon fans that are kind of like, it's good. Yeah, doing well, doing solid. Like, I think it speaks to the standards that we have now as fans, which I'm not opposed to, by the way. Because at some point you have to have high standards if you're going to go win the big one. But this is Dan Lanning and company's first full recruiting cycle, in which they lost one of their two major assistant coaches. And this is what they were able to come up with. A top 10 class, the second best in Oregon history. That's a pretty darn good place to be. And I'm pretty happy with that. We'll talk more about recruiting tomorrow with my guy, Max Torres. Speaking of where we'd like to be, Oregon basketball is not there right now. Decidedly not there. Now, as this episode drops, I will tell you what my plans will be later tonight. I will be watching Oregon play Arizona, and you should too. You should too, because Oregon, believe it or not, is not out of making the NCAA tournament. Even without winning the conference tournament to get the auto bid, which may very well at some point in time end up being their only option. But they have a remaining schedule that is not favorable per se in terms of how easy it is or where you get teams, because the Arizona game tonight is on the road. Arizona State on Saturday, on the road. Tough places to play against good teams, particularly Tucson tonight on ESPN, big game. If you have a regular season series sweep with Arizona, both wins would have come when the Wildcats are ranked in the top 10. That's not bad. In fact, it would be pretty darn good. And do I think Oregon's capable of accomplishing this? Getting themselves, into like a 12-11 seed range? Yep, I do. I know that they are capable of it. Do I think they will? Tonight's going to be a really good indicator, and that's why I'll be watching. How do they play on the road against a really good team in a tough environment? They're about an 8.5-point underdog. They should be. I don't necessarily think they need to win tonight, but if they can go out there and prove that they're capable of putting together another good performance after back-to-back wins last week against good teams in Utah and Colorado, good solid teams in the Pac-12 this year, if you follow that up with a 5-point loss at Arizona and then can beat Arizona State, I will start to believe more in this particular team. I do still have some faith in Dana Altman as a coach in the long run, though the seat is perhaps warmer than it was a year ago at this time. But there's a lot of talent coming in for next year, and I do think you have to wait that out. But when you look at what Oregon needs to build an at-large resume, that's where the schedule is favorable in a sense, because the number of quality opponents that you need with how Oregon has performed in certain games this year that have resulted really in more bad losses than a lack of quality wins. Arizona is a really quality win. Villanova might turn out to be a decent win, but it's, not incredible. But Utah twice, Colorado, it's solid. It's not amazing, but it's pretty darn solid. And that Arizona win is, of course, to this point, the crowning achievement in the year. But their schedule that remains is the key factor here, because this is how it plays out. This week, you have to beat at least one of the Arizona schools. You go 0-2, you're probably tournament or bust. But Arizona State is looking like a field of 68 team. And Arizona is looking like a top 2 seed in the tournament. If you beat one of those teams, that's what you'd call a quad 1 win. They have several quad 1 games remaining, 4 of them in fact. UCLA, which they get at home. They played them tight on the road much earlier in the year when they weren't as healthy, and they've had some good home performances this year, especially of late against the mountain schools, and then before that against Arizona. But they've got UCLA at home. USC, I think, is a quad 2 game, might be quad 1. They've got at Arizona and at Arizona State. I think USC is the 4th quad 1 game that's in there. The LA schools at home, the Arizona schools on the road. If you get 1 this week, and if you can beat UCLA, I think you could even lose to USC. There's a path. There's a very, very realistic path. And the thing that I'm not hopeful yet, I just haven't given up. That's where I am with the basketball team at this point in time. I'm not hopeful saying, they finally turned a corner. They played 2 good games in a row. No, you got to do it for more than that. That's what college basketball is. It's a long season. It's a grind. But one thing that is giving me some optimism here is Jermaine Couisnard. His ability to take pressure off Will Richardson is tremendous. Because I have long defended Will Richardson and always added the caveat. He's not a great number 1. He's a great number 2 or a 1A. And guess what? When Couisnard is in the zone and he's been scoring well and he's been shooting it well from 3, which this team sorely needs on a consistent basis, Will Richardson can play off ball. He doesn't have to have the ball in his hands and create all the time, and he's a little bit more selective and not as much is asked of him. If that trend is able to continue, I think they can split with the Arizona schools this week. And if you can then beat UCLA, a game that'll be at home, and we've beaten UCLA at home before, and we played them tight on the road this year, and that was before Couisnard and Barthélemy and everybody else were really back. There is a path there. Not hopeful, but not giving up either. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Go Ducks.